At this juncture, let me invite on stage private sector colleagues. Let's start with the Executive Secretary for ECOWAS Rice Observatory, Madam Boladale. Yes, please. Feel free to take the center as the First Lady to join us. The second panelist we have is going to be, do we have Dr. Simon Winter from Syngenta Foundation? Yes, please join us on stage. And we have Freddie Tucker from British International Investment. Please join us on stage. We have, do we have the Chief Executive Officer for Africa Improved Foods in the room? Please join us on stage. I might actually need one more seat. Logistics, can you help us bring one more? Because I think I have two people that I cannot do without. Mr. Johannes Asefa, the Director of Market Systems, Economic Growth Governance, DT Global. Anyone working on a seat? Mumbi? Yeah, please. I think we can have it on that corner, that end. Sincere apologies for that. But Mr. Christopher Zou, CEO for WARC in Ghana. Thank you. Our panelists. Of course, we continue to have high-level delegates join us. Monsieur Zinzu, former Prime Minister and Agra Board Chair, is in the room. Let's acknowledge his presence. I think those of us who join the main plenary later in the afternoon, you'll get to listen to him speak to us later on, I think at 3 o'clock. So, where do we start? Simon, you've been with us in these conversations, not just coming through on the stage like this, but in action, actually, putting in effort to help African agriculture systems. What have you brought for us today? How do you want to continue, creating and forging these partnerships in Africa to just encourage, more smallholder farmers participate, but also access the right inputs? I think that's important. We hear productivity as a problem. What's going to happen? What's new now, Simon?
That sounds a bit better. So I don't think it's new, but I think it's increasingly evident that climate change is affecting the ability of producers, whether they're large or small, to be able to produce reliably. And one of the things that we need, and this is more on the innovation side now, is better innovations that can help farmers tackle climate change. And this is one of the key areas that our foundation, Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, is working on, whether it's in terms of improved seed varieties that are climate stress tolerant in partnership with research organizations like the CGIAR or national universities and agricultural research services and so on. We need to improve the way that we are addressing soil health. The ongoing degradation of soils is a major challenge. We need better soil data, we need better soil amendments, we need guidance for farmers who want to diversify their farms. There's a lot of innovation work happening, but a lot of that is still very much at the startup phase or in the research parks. And then we need finance that enables all of these innovations to be adopted. And we need that finance to be accessible, available, affordable, but also we need to take the risks away from the farmers who might fear taking on a loan or taking on some financing facility in order to actually acquire these innovations and use them. And again, our foundation leans in on index-based insurance solutions, not to be sold separately from these innovations, but to be bundled in with the innovations. And then all of this needs to be delivered to the farmers. So again, innovative models addressing the first mile and last mile challenges of smallholders who are not yet commercially successful and attractive to the major commercial players. That's another area that we're focusing on.
Thank you for being generous with time. I wanted you to just pin down that example of innovative solution. Where is it working, and how perhaps can we take it to scale? Just pin down on a specific example.
Yeah, I'm going to actually talk about an example from Asia that we think could be very successful in Africa. So this notion of technology transfer is something that we're also very focused on. We've done a lot of work over the last 2+ decades on the research side in rice production to figure out how to reduce methane emissions and improve water use efficiency in rice production through something called alternating wetting and drying in rice. Unfortunately, AWD in rice on its own doesn't have an incentive for farmers to adopt it, because what happens is the farmers end up having more weeds in their rice paddies, which means they either now need to spend more money on herbicides or they need more labor time to do the weeding. So farmers don't adopt it by itself. But if you take a solution like that and you bundle it in with rotational crops that have market opportunities for significant income improvements, such as vegetables or some bean varieties and so on, now you have a bundled solution that has profitability associated with the farmers, and the farmers will then adopt the improved rice practices. And then with the profits, they can actually then invest in improved rice varieties so that they can actually then increase the yield of their rice production as well. So when you take a bundled solution like that, you then have to prove it, of course, that there's a business model for the farmers, for the input suppliers, for the off-takers, and so on. But there's also then the potential to bring in climate incentives if we can get methane reduction credits into the hands of smallholder farmers, and you have a package solution that we think is highly scalable.
Thank you so much, Simon. I think this is really, really useful, and we can't wait to have those solutions, brought to Africa at scale. But I know Christopher is yearning to really intervene on that point, because I know he's also working, as a private sector in the same space. And yes, can we have experience from West Africa, Christopher, and how you're, engaging with farmers and supporting climate resilience in that sense? Because we know that trade will not happen if our farmers are failing. So what is it that's innovative from your end?
Sure, absolutely. So I mean, for those that don't know us, we're working predominantly with smallholder farmers in the northern Ghana and also in Sierra Leone, working directly in the communities with the farmers, and that's where we are based and where we live, and we speak their language, And I think the honorable ministers from Tanzania and from Ethiopia mentioned it, that the private sector is that engine towards that fuels this growth. So what I would just like to comment on that point is that, let us power that growth, and let us play that role that we need. Let us adopt the technologies that, organizations that have the power, like Syngenta Foundation and the technologies behind it, to adopt that and work with us. So what I would say in terms of how can we first, before getting into some of those technologies, how can we actually pass that through to smallholder farmers and incorporate them into the mix of what we're trying to do, is really to think of the fact that, SMEs like us, individually small, actually, collectively, we're a funnel that can speak the languages of the smallholder farmers, of the donor community, of the large, multinationals and research institutions, and of the investors. So that's a great way for us to see that, it extends the reach by focusing on a smaller group of organizations and people inside of it. Now, seed is a fantastic place to start when we're talking about technologies and how we can increase climate resilience for farmers, Seed is the only thing that succeeds seed is the soil health, and Dr. Simon, you mentioned this specifically, is that what we need to do is, when we think about policies and technologies that go with it, understand the fact that agriculture takes a long time, right? Improvements in agriculture really take time to come and play through. So what we should be looking at is technologies that can be adopted over season after season after season, and we can't think about how we're going to do this in one fell swoop that's going to suddenly change the environment. So smallholder farmers, as a starting point, in order to adopt anything, need to generate income, right? And as a first step in income generation from a smallholder farmer, consider the fact that this is linked to agricultural production and takes, time, season on season. So therefore, any of these improvements that we're thinking about, any of the policies that we're thinking about, any of the technologies that we want to bring into the space, we have to consider that these are things that have to be rolled out from a season-by-season perspective, using organizations like us in order to facilitate that transfer to a smallholder farmer. So, I mean, there are many, many different areas that we can go into, but I also want to pass it and give the opportunity for the rest to speak as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe before you run away, I mean, there's probably a few 100,000 farmers, smallholder farmers in Africa, depending on who you ask, maybe slightly less, but your solutions only reach so many. What do you think would be a model that helps us, hit the critical mass of smallholder farmers engaged in one solution or two to make this happen, just to make a difference? I mean, feel free to say, come later. Okay.
I would counter a little bit the fact that you think that it can only reach so many. That's why I said individually, that can be the case. But if I just use an example of, an innovative business model, which I would then like to put there, is that, we developed a model now that's not dependent on finance. It's not dependent on smallholder farmers receiving input credits or whatnot. And it's on a unit economics basis, extremely viable. A $5,000 investment into a single hub, which are the facilities that we run, generated for us $250,000 of revenue per hub. And that's a massive turnaround and massive unit economics. So if we can figure out how to scale that up across the country, all of northern Ghana, across through southern Ghana, hopefully through to our regional neighbors as well, and then across the continent, that's no longer so little anymore, right? So I would say that there's a huge room, not just in the technologies that go into it, but that business model that drives that change, and that's what's going to catalyze the rest of it.
Thank you. I guess that's a nice segue to, Freddie. I see you are nodding. Yeah, let's clap. As Christopher was talking and saying it's not an issue of finance or what, it's a business model. I'm sure you're like, okay, maybe it's both. Tell us, Freddie, what are these kinds of financing mechanisms that BII has been, propagating just to get us to scale, and maybe any other thoughts you have based on, how we can reach the critical mass by just enabling the financing for agriculture happen.
Thanks, Daniel. And I think I'd start by saying I agree with the statement that's been repeated a couple of times, that the private sector really can be the engine for growth. But let me just start by explaining a little bit about British International Investment, who I work for. We are the UK government's development finance institution, and we've been investing in Africa for nearly 75 years. We provide equity, short-term and long-term debt, and we provide guarantees across a range of sectors in Africa. And we always invest in the private sector. We have a dedicated food and agricultural team, and in total we have about $10 billion under management. I'm part of our trade and supply chain finance team, and I sit in our food security working group. So the reason I mention that is it means we look at all the financial products we have and how we can deploy them effectively in Africa to achieve food security. So as a DFI, we're very considerate about additionality. And to us, what this means is that we're here to take risk that commercial funders otherwise would not. It's important that we demonstrate additionality, and we're not competing with the commercial lenders and the banks in the market or other investors who would do this on a purely commercial basis. And generally, we do this by having a higher risk appetite, but still seeking appropriate returns. And I'll give one example of this. In February this year, we committed $50 million to Dal Group in Sudan. This will allow the import of 280,000 tons of wheat per year into the country. This was before the most recent conflict broke out, but we still had to compete with some significant challenges, which I think any investment in Sudan would have to deal with. We had the macroeconomic challenges, conflict issues, high international sourcing costs, and there have been serious climate events in Sudan with droughts and flooding happening in recent years. And I think the final point I'll add on this, Daniel, is we're also seeing many more blended finance structures in the market. And I think this is a really appropriate solution for some of the things that we're seeing today. This is where different financiers with different objectives and different risk appetites come together in sort of a multi-partner solution to really analyze how they can bring their different perspectives to invest and solve food security. We've got first loss structures or guarantees, and these help more commercial lenders. And I think we can also look outside of agriculture and take some inspiration from interesting structures that we've seen elsewhere. Like there are debt for nature transactions going on in Gabon or in Belize, a bit further afield, which could potentially be applied to agriculture. These structures take into account the different kind of risk that different finance providers, are willing to take. Philanthropy, aid money, concessional financing, scale-up commercial financing. There's a whole host of different appetites out there. But I think whatever the solution is, it's going to be a multi-stakeholder initiative.
Thank you. Round of applause there. But I still need you to have the mic, because I know a few youth in the room. SMEs are like, we have heard that before. After all, you've been around, 75 years? Why are we still not accessing, financing? I mean, this may not be your remit within BII, but in general, for somebody who's working in the sector, what should be done? What needs to happen to extend more, similar facilities for the, small, perhaps less bankable kind of businesses in agricultural value chains in the continent? What's your take on that?
So I'd maintain that it's about finding the right financiers for the right risk. Something we've done at BII is to introduce different pots of capital that allow us to take different types of risk. So we have one pot of capital that we can use, which goes to higher risk investments where there is a significant chance that we're not going to get our money back. But the reason we use that pot of capital is because the impact is so high, and we see those investments as making systematic change to certain sectors. In this case, very specifically for climate-smart agriculture. And I think, that's very important, as you say, getting funding to SMEs, getting funding to different areas of the market. There's a lot of money out there today for climate. It really is a buzzword. So let's access those pots of capital by addressing climate-smart agricultural issues.
No, thanks a lot, Freddie. And I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, as he's putting it. But I think we need to also, work on how we structure some of these, solutions and build the capacity of the SMEs to be able to access. But I know that Ramesh, through AIF, have dealt a lot with, sourcing from farmers. And this is also a model of, financing. When you create those, linkages with farmers and offer them a market, there's predictability and all that helps. I mean, let me not, explain this for you. What is the role you're playing in that space, opening up market access and financing for small farmers?
The challenge on the continent in my 30 years of experience is that financial institutions are very happy to sit in A-class cities, service the needs of some local corporates, make a lot of money, and do nothing, absolutely nothing for the farming community. So the most exploited, least supported, least financed, and the least educated part of our community, the farmers, are expected to solve the world's food solutions. It's an impossible job. Unless we change this mindset and the structure, life is not going to change, with all the best intention that we have. Therefore, the onus is then on international institutions, which are corporates, private sector, to really support the farmers. So AIF in Rwanda supports about 90,000 farmers. We have approximately $1 million at any point in time in advances sitting with farmers. But that's one country and one company. We need hundreds of such companies doing these kind of things to make a real difference and move the needle. I used to work for a company called Olam International for 28 years. At any point in time, 4 million farmers had in excess of $35 million sitting with them, servicing 20 different crops. You need that scale to really move the needle and make a difference. And I have no doubt that by providing this finance well in advance of the purchase of the crop, and providing them inputs, and providing them good agricultural practices, life can really change. And there are live examples of how quality has been upgraded because the farmer has felt secure with financing. Yields have changed because they have been taught good agricultural practices. You know, the Mozambican cotton farmer is the poorest cotton farmer in the world. They have the lowest yields in the world. But it has taken us 8 years of canvassing with the policymakers to change the quality of the seed, because that seed was 35 generations old. The neighboring country, Zimbabwe, has a significantly better yield, giving 3 times the output that the Mozambican farmer was getting. But that's the nature of negotiation that needs to be done. And that just doesn't come by throwing money. You still have to employ 200 different trucks with large video screens indicating how good agricultural practices can change the yield in the cotton farms in Mozambique. And you know, Mozambique is a big country. We are talking of a lot of scale there. So you change the seed, you change the agricultural practice, you change the financing structures, and then the farmers start seeing daylight. All right? And that's just the beginning of the battle. We are still a long way from producing what the Australian farmer produces of 3.5 tons per hectare. We are still at 700 kilos, 800 kilos. I'm not talking cotton across Africa. All right? So we are in a long battle, and financing is just the beginning part of it. Does that answer your question?
It does. But I still need you to stay there because I know as AIF you are involved in a lot of value addition, processing and what have you. And we learned earlier from the first panel that, you know, food safety issues, quality is of paramount importance in regional value chains. What is the role you're playing in that space, and how are you encouraging, you know, a transfer of knowledge downstream or upstream to the farmers to ensure that you get the right quality and for your industry?
So Africa Improved Foods runs easily the best food processing plant on the continent. I've been to those that run by Unilever and Nestle across the continent. I have no doubt that AIF runs the best food processing plant. Because of that reason, WFP buys only from Africa Improved Foods on the continent, all right? If that is the case, the recipe that the World Food Programme provides us very specifically indicates the quality of input that can go into producing the output. Therefore, we have to enforce those standards with the farmers. When AIF began 6 years back, over 90% of the cargo of maize that was delivered was rejected because of aflatoxin. Then AIF engaged with the farming communities and taught them good agricultural practices. Today, we have a rejection of about 6%. So what it has directly done is impacted the farmer by producing better quality output so that we can pay a premium for the better quality and create wealth for the farmer. It is these kind of practices repeatedly across the continent that will change the lot of the farmer. So one is the quality of the input. Number 2 is the yield. Both of these can go towards helping the farmer create wealth. Otherwise, we are stuck with a 63-year-old farmer across the continent, and he's not getting younger. If we want to change the fate of our food systems, first, there has to be more youth and enthusiasm at the farmer level, and only then things will change.
Yes, that deserves a clap. Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, it starts from at the top. If you communicate really what your requirements are and support the system upwards, farmers are willing to change. I mean, we're seeing behavior change in that sense. So I think this is really a message to all of us who are involved in this space to make the differences. But I know that getting that done requires, you know, some system thinking in the marketplace. And I'm looking at you, Johannes. You've been in this space for some time, and talk to us. What is your experience, you know, just ensuring that, number one, we trigger the right levels of, you know, production with farmers in the right quality, and then we connect that across, you know, the chain to the manufacturers, to the processors, and get it to the market. What is a missing link? How should we participate in that space to just ensure that those relationships are stable and strong?
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I mean, just to repeat what Deja earlier said, the market works until it doesn't, right? And there's one variable that keeps coming up usually, policy impediments or lack thereof. You know, in the market systems approach, I mean, this is in development talk, there's policy supposed to be a supporting mechanism, but it also could be an impediment. what we've found from our work, working with USAID, we have two projects, for example, one in Zambia and in Uganda on policy improvement, business enabling environment. Real honest discussions between the private sector and the public sector is required. Both sides have something to bring and to talk about. Problem exists on both sides, and sometimes in these kinds of forums, we talk about how the government is impeding and the private sector is trying to do something and not being able, but the private sector is also has problems, right? So when you have an honest discussions between government and the private sector, you identify challenges and you try to solve them at a very organic grassroots level. Public-private dialogue forums have really worked well across the continent. The IFC initially pioneered them. We're supporting them, for example, in Zambia and in Uganda, not just at the elite national level, but at a grassroots level as well, at a village level, right? And it works its way up to the top level. And that, through that process, you identify the key issues that are affecting, agricultural production, productivity, trade, financing, logistics, and the whole. But it's a whole system, right? Like Gestalt theory, the whole is made up of the part is made up of the whole. If one piece is not working, the whole part doesn't work. If markets are not working, who was said earlier, Dej, again, I'll repeat Dej, my colleague, farmers are punished when they produce, when they're very productive and produce a lot, prices fall, and they don't make money. They get punished when they don't produce enough, they starve, right? And that's a lack of a market system not working properly, functioning. Markets, like rivers, will flow and work without impediment. If there's no, bridge or there's no dam that stops it, it will go on. But markets also cannot just go without any oversight, right? Government has a very important role. Balancing that is critical. But to do that, policy has to be evidence-based policy making, not journalism-driven policy, right? Identify those challenges and work with evidence. And sometimes the private sector lacks the ability to produce those evidence, right? The trade associations are not as strong. This is where development partners come in and support. USAID has supported trade associations and different private sector groups across the continent, and we've been involved in that. And that evidence helps identify challenges. For example, in Uganda, through that process, we identify registration of cooperatives at the national level was a challenge because they have to go to Kampala to sign up. And the remote villagers cannot travel. The cost is an impediment. Helping them innovate, build an online registration system. An idea that was generated through this dialogue allows now villagers to come up with cooperatives, sign up at the village level, create scale, right? Crowd-in financing, sourcing of inputs and other important inputs needed to grow agriculture, right? But related to trade and what was being discussed earlier, there's also, at the national level, at the regional level, there is an important dialogue that's required. The EAC is the oldest common market in the world, older than the European Union, yet it still has many challenges, as was described earlier, because sometimes the countries compete against each other on a different level, not just agricultural, but political as well. And those impediments come in the way. But the antidote to that problem is competitiveness. And to become competitiveness, you have to expand the marketplace. USA, through the Trade Hub, for example, expanded the market for maize in East Africa by working with surplus and deficit countries, from allowing maize to come from as far as Zambia all the way from Ethiopia. Ethiopia and Kenya are neighbors, but they don't have a trade agreement. The common external tariff between the EAC and Ethiopia is 50%, right? In 2017, during the drought, there was a temporary suspension of the CET that allowed the importation of 150,000 maize, tons of maize from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the largest producer of maize in Eastern Africa by 1 million metric ton, more than Tanzania, right? Imagine that amount of maize coming to the Eastern Africa region and to the marketplace. I guarantee you, pretty soon you'll have less countries putting up export barriers, right? I can go on, but let me stop here and give the others option. Eventually, CFTA and the regional payment mechanisms for settling locally will improve also trade. And this dialogue regionally also needs to continue.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I think we can clap for you as well. Yeah, thank you. You bring up a number of issues there and trying to wrap up everything in a way, but I pin down, the need for continuous public-private dialogue. And I think that's the point that Honorable Minister Shatu also mentioned, that it helped resolve a difficult challenge in trade. So let's keep those conversations open. And you mentioned evidence. I mean, evidence-based policy making and all of. I think countries like Tanzania already, Ethiopia, Uganda earlier, are some of the few countries that are really looking at this also in a positive fashion. And our partners, USA, FCDO, BMGF, are supporting, things like the regional food balance sheet, which is a tool for informing those decisions. And also competitiveness. I think that's also an important area. I like the Ethiopia angle. I wish the minister was still here. I think it's a high potential export country, and it requires all of that support. But I mean, in between your contribution, obviously you're talking about working together with other partners and what have you. I like to hear from Boladale with a specific example of the ECOWAS Rice Observatory. So now we're in West Africa. How are you doing it? What is the role of, or how are you forging the partnerships within the rice sector to just ensure that we are addressing, the critical challenges at the right time with everybody else on board? That's a form of PPD as well. Can you, talk to us? And I think while she's talking, I'm conscious of time. I think I might have another 5 minutes for us, just 1 minute for the rest of us after you, madam, to just say their final words, if you need to say anything final. So you can wrap up within your intervention. Over to you, Boladale.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Okay, so within the ECOWAS Rice Observatory, like you have rightly noted, it's a multi-stakeholder platform. I mean, there were issues, there were challenges that we have observed within the rice sector in West Africa. We are consuming rice that we are not totally producing everything locally. We are producing, we have improvements here and there, but then it's not meeting the demand that we have in the region. And of course, our import bill as well. So we also do know that ECOWAS as a commission has woken up to that reality way back in 2015 when they launched the Rice Offensive strategy. And this is just to ensure that we have a sustained and sustainable rice cultivation in the region. And a lot of development partners, national governments, through their national rice development strategies, and all of them had come together to begin to work within that sector to ensure that we are able to achieve this rice of self-sufficiency in the region. But what we also do realize is that we have different development partners working in the rice sector along the entire value chain, the different segments attracting different forms of investments. But we also realize that we have duplication of efforts, and we do realize that some segments are probably attracting more investment than some other segments of the value chain. And so how do we coordinate all of these efforts? How do we bring synergy into all of these, so that we are not reinventing the wheel and we are not wasting investments if we want to have the kind of impact that we desire. And we need to complement each other. So the ECOWAS Rice Observatory came up, and the idea is to bring, for all of the partners, to leverage the financial, expertise, skills, political, powers and all the commitments that they have to bear around this common goal of ensuring that we are self-sufficient. And so what you see within the structure of the ECOWAS Rice Observatory is that we have the development partners, but importantly is the private sector angle to it. We are looking at sustainability, and we are thinking that the private sector should take the driver's seat and to drive this agenda so that we are able to achieve what we intend to achieve. So we are coordinating investments of government, of donor, of development organizations all together, but towards a market-driven solution, so that at the end of the day, we are looking at it from the actors' perspectives. And this is very important because we also use that to provide input for policy harmonization. That's why I like that point, because government at some point, yes, we have policies out there, and they will tell you, yes, we do have, we've thought about it. But then when we get to implementation, why is it not working, especially in this sector? So I think we have to get to a point where those policies are not just clear, but then we have to make sure the policies are consistent to the extent that the private sector can engage and they can trust the process to make sure it works. And within the Rice Observatory, you know that at the national levels, we are also establishing the national chapters, which allows us to work directly with the players, the private sector players at the national level, the grassroots, like you would call it. And at this level, they are able to lend a voice, they are able to speak up, they are able to voice out the interest of their particular, of the different countries, their interests, their priorities. They are able to identify those priorities. And then at the regional level, what we do is that we make our actions, we make those actions, we do those things based on those priorities that they have identified. So we know that we are meeting the exact need. It's context specific and it is targeted. So we are intentional about what we do at that level, looking at the private sector and the public sector, how we work together. So sitting at the table, we have the private sector, we have the development of the civil society, the NGOs. Everyone is there at the table. That is very important with the agenda for rice self-sufficiency in West Africa.
Thank you so much. Thank you. A good clap. Yeah. No, I think West Africa is on the verge of potentially a rice success story. Seeing what's happening in Nigeria, likes of Burkina, closing in on that import gap. So I think with those initiatives, we still, we can't wait to see the success of it. I like to give just 45 seconds to just, each one of us, if we have any last words, and I know there's a lot, but we'll start with colleagues that have microphones in their hands. Christopher, we start from there, and then we come to Freddie, and then we come to Simon this way, and Ramesh will end in the middle. I'm assuming, yeah, let's do that. I need to save about 5 minutes. We have an interesting closing, which is a 5-minute closing of everything that's come up today, and we'll have to close at exactly 13:30. So please, one minute max.
Sure. I mean, just to carry on that conversation and the analogy of the private sector being the engine, and the message that passed through about collaboration, working together, how the different private and public sectors have to come together, let me just continue that analogy as best I can. So we as private sector are the engine, but the engine alone cannot function, right? So to the governments that are around, help us build that infrastructure and the network that lets us drive, right? To the multinationals, the larger organizations, the donor community, let's design the best fuel and oil that goes into that car to power that engine, right? And then I would actually say then let the farmers drive. Give them the best thing that we can do and let them drive.
Thank you. Thank you. Freddie?
Continue again with the theme. I would say, so my background is in trade finance, and in trade finance, to mitigate risk, we can implement a variety of structures, okay? So we can look at asset control, insurance, and ownership transfers. Now, these are only as valuable as their enforceability. And I think we need to think about that when we're looking at agricultural financing and the mitigation structures we can use there. We need to consider offtake contracts and their enforceability. How do we manage things like side selling, robust contracting and enforcement? Certainly as a financier, those are the sort of things we look at. But again, it takes multi-stakeholders to address these problems.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Simon?
So I'll continue on the multi-stakeholder theme, because there are proven innovations that we're hearing from the whole panel that can really help farmers increase their productivity and increase their resilience to climate change. But we're not going to see them scaled up if it's business as usual with every actor along the value chain operating in silos. We have to bring actors together, and this requires both the kind of innovative finance solutions, Freddie, that you're talking about. I'd love to follow up with you about that afterwards, very in keeping with our own thinking. But it also requires the public sector not only to have the favorable policy environment, but to use its resources in a smart way. And just to call that out on two particular things. One is there are a lot of agricultural subsidies, but if you look across the continent, I'm quoting now from 2018, so OECD data there showed, Ethiopia, 37% support for farmers, percentage of farm receipts. Nigeria, less than 1%. So we need to get those subsidies not only to be at an appropriate level, but also to be smart, supporting the scale up of these innovations, better agricultural practices, and so on. And then finally, we also need more investment in public sector research and development in the continent. We've been doing studies in Nigeria and Kenya, as well as in Asia. Every country is less than 1%. The Malabo Declaration said countries must invest 1% of agricultural GDP in national R&D. It's not happening. And the money that is being invested is not being invested in climate smart solutions, nutritional solutions, and so on. It's being invested in very old school traditional R&D projects. So there's a big transformation ahead of us.
Thank you. Ramesh.
A large part of our optimism about Africa is based on the fact that our average age of the continent is 19 and we'll have the largest workforce very soon, etc., etc. The piece we are missing is that children between 0 to 24 months, if they're not properly fed, we'll end up with 30% of our population unable to learn or with inability to pick up new ideas. And that is not going to support us. So I don't think there's enough effort, time, and money being put behind ensuring that our children get the right feed at the right time. I think that's a challenge that we really need to address.
Thank you, thank you. Johannes.
Quickly, I think a big part of what we're missing is political will from governments. Why do I say that? I mean, governments will say, this is important, that's important, we're doing this and we're doing that. But there's objective measurement. If you look at the doing business indicators, look at all these countries, we're saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, but yet we're not seeing improvements in the livelihoods of farmers and marginalized communities. That political will has to be seen in the results, and governments have to walk the walk, not just the talk.
Thank you. That's a loaded one. Yeah. I mean, Boladale, any last words? Or you won't give me 1 minute because I need it.
Okay. All right. So thank you. And I think maybe just to balance it off a little bit, in as much as we also know that governments will provide an enabling environment through what they do, the policies, and all, it is also important for the private sector stakeholders to jump into the flow and in a way complement and support those policies to ensure that it is properly implemented. It is two-sided. It should go both ways. One cannot do without the other. And finally, I would like to say something about the finance and innovative ideas, technologies, the various models that you have. We have realized that accessing financing, whether insurance or for risk or de-risking, whatever it is, we realize it's a major challenge and it hinders most of our farmers, especially in the rice sector. And so at Aero, one of the things that we have done is to launch a study that is looking at scalable financing options. What is the financial requirement of each actor along the entire rice value chain? We're looking at these dynamics to begin to see that what model is out there that they can adapt, that they can use, they can pick up, and they can actually put into there. So we don't just probably formulate new models because it sounds attractive, but then is it really meeting the need of the actors along the entire rice value chain? This is one of the things that we are actually looking at.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
You remain seated. Thank you, Boladale. At this juncture, I'd like to invite Mansour Ahmad, who's been listening very, very, very attentively and putting together notes in that short space of time. What are the key takeaways from our conversation today? So, Mansour, over to you. You have 5 minutes, and then maybe we can invite Honorable Minister and Echi Zinzu to the podium for a picture with the panelists as we close the day. So over to you, Mansour.
Your Excellencies and delegates, I've got a tough task now. This session, as you know, has been about food markets and trade and making food move. I feel like I'm the barrier to making you move to the food. So please allow me to quickly go through what I have heard today. And there's a lot of consistency between panel 1, which was with the policymakers, and panel 2 with the private sector. And I must start with a polite disagreement with my friend Johannes, who said there needs to be more, there's not enough political will. Panel 1, I feel, was demonstration of the political leadership from our ministers of trade, industry, from Ethiopia, Tanzania, Senegal, as well as the representative from Uganda. And why I'm saying that is, what I heard is the great work that's been being done in recognition of efficiency, for example. Efficiency is vital to keeping trade going, and whether that's on improving production efficiency or transport and logistics. And I heard from the private sector panel the importance of unit economics. That's not going to improve in the absence of efficiency. So that's something that we should all recognize, and it's valuable that the ministers are working on this endeavor. Being good neighbors is also what I heard from the panel of esteemed policymakers. Keeping borders open, enabling improvement in SPS and other quality standards. And that is again vital, and to a commitment that I hope we and the panel of private sector can hold to account these ministers, given the commitment to be good neighbors and keep borders open. And what a great example from the Minister of Tanzania about the AFCFTA. So the cargo that has now been moved from Tanzania to Senegal is, I'm sure, one of many that we'll see in the future. But what more is needed to enable that to happen is it's something which we should all be discussing and collaborating on. We also heard the innovations by governments such as Ethiopia on the integrated agribusiness model to look at coordinating the various elements of value chains. We also heard similar from the private sector about bundling of solutions. We heard from BII about their teams of different financial products and how they're thinking about complementary structuring of those products for the problems that the market is facing. So again, there's a lot of alignment to what the governments are committing and recognizing, but also what the private sector are requesting and doing. In a similar way, we also heard about the fact that markets work from our friend Ayodeji, but equally the role of data infrastructure to enable the markets to work. And so under the leadership of COMESA, the regional food balance sheet endeavor was mentioned. And again, what more needs to be done across other regions to strengthen that data infrastructure. And the commitment was clearly there from the private sector to support on that, but equally on the policy makers to do more on that side. We also heard about the importance of value addition, and value addition being vital to strengthen the economic resilience of countries and the economic productivity of countries given the macroeconomic issues. And that also ties to the issue of adoption of technologies. For smallholder farmers to sustainably, in terms of longevity, adopt technologies, they need greater incomes. So without sustained income generation, the ability to afford such technologies will be limited. So again, income generation tied to value addition, it all needs to be connected. And last but not least, we heard about policy predictability and coherence as being vital. And that is what platforms such as ECOWAS Rights Observatory are trying to do. And on that note, that's a great demonstration of how a multi-stakeholder platform can facilitate coherence across a value chain. And those are kind of the models that hopefully we can all rally around. And it's a great demonstration, especially when we're in this mode of thinking about post-Malabo, the AFCFTA. So hopefully that gives you a quick run-through of what we've heard, the various alignment there is already between what policymakers are doing in the continent, what the private sector are doing and calling for, and demonstrates that AGRF as a platform is a great convener of these multi-stakeholder approaches. What I'd like to end on is, first of all, thank the panelists for gracing us with their time, but also to thank the hosts of AGRF, the government of Tanzania, for allowing us the opportunity to descend into Tanzania. And we should also not forget the leadership of Dr. Agnes Kalibata of AGRA. And AGRA was the institution that the UK government incubated the Regional Food Trade Unit. And that's played a great role in moving this agenda forward. And finally, let me also invite you, as did AO, to get some cashew nuts, because they are great. And for those that have nut allergies, there's great coffee from Kilimanjaro and also Kitenge. So don't leave empty-handed.
Thank you so much. Let's stay here. I think we had the best person to do this. I couldn't have done 5% of that. Thank you, Mansu, for wrapping us up. Really.